Thank you all for coming. And tonight is our third informational session this year on emergency preparedness. And we're doing these because the town was able to get a federal grant to improve the kitchen and the bathrooms here at the community center. And part of that grant process. And over next will be Sarah Bickford. Sarah is with the Somerset County Emergency Management Agency. And overall, how to get people involved and just being ready and prepared for when an emergency does happen. So I'm going to turn it over to Kelsey, and feel free, is it okay to raise hands?
Absolutely.
And for questions. Yeah. We do have a live mic, so everything here is being recorded on Crossroads TV. So the mic is very important so that your comments and questions can be heard in television land. So again, thank you for coming, and I look forward to a very interesting conversation. Thank you.
That's the hope. Well, thank you, everybody. I appreciate everybody being here. My name is Kelsey Priest. I'm the Individual Assistance Officer with Maine Emergency Management Agency. What that means is anytime we have an emergency or disaster that might affect individuals, home, property, even loss of life, that's the FEMA program that we try to bring in to help with that recovery process. When we're not dealing with disaster, I get to do exciting things like community resiliency. And so one of my favorite and biggest projects is CERT teams, community emergency response teams. So CERT teams are formed by trained volunteers. They can be from the same neighborhood, the same city, the same county, pre-made groups, groups that form. And they basically come together and all take the same basic training to be better prepared for emergencies that might threaten their communities. There are a few different types of CERT. So there's the general CERT that can sort of fill in community needs. Aries and races are both radio teams. They're different because I believe when the frequencies they use and when they're activated. Don't quiz me on which ones. And then CART teams are community animal response teams. So in situations where there might be pets who need support, CART teams can work to hang on to pets while there's an evacuation. There's also the potential for things like farm. There are some carts that can help with farm animals if we're having big issues and there's lots of horses, cows, or something that need sheltering or to be moved. That's the kind of stuff that they can help with. CERT began in 1986 in Los Angeles. They took it from a program in Japan because there was a really big earthquake in Mexico. Just before that, there was a huge earthquake, killed hundreds of people, and a lot of volunteers sort of jumped in to try and help and did save lives, but a lot of those volunteers also died because they didn't know how to stay safe and they weren't properly trained. So Los Angeles saw that and recognized that they will definitely continue to have emergencies and they should create a program to help volunteers be better prepared. And so that's how they came up with CERT. And then FEMA adopted that in 1993, and it grew for a while. And then after 9/11, there was a very big surge of interest about how to get involved with CERT and be with that. And now there are teams in all 50 states. And Maine has had CERT since 2008. It had lessened over the last 10 years or so, but we are bringing it back starting in 2024. We started doing things like having our train the trainers and getting more support for them. So it's not new in Maine, but we are reinvigorating the effort there. So where does CERT fit in? CERT does not replace first responders. We don't want volunteers doing police work. We don't want them running into burning buildings. But we do want them to be able to support emergency responders so that they can do their jobs. The less stuff that they need to do that's not really as important or needs as much training that a community volunteer who can be trained on it can do, the better, because it just creates an atmosphere, or it creates a way for them to have more time to do their jobs. So what can CERTs do? So they can support responders on scene during or after an emergency disaster, so like the earthquakes, fires, floods, and they can educate their communities on the importance of emergency preparedness. So there is an emergency response type area of that, and then when we're not responding to emergencies, they can help communities get more resilient, get more prepared through education, through events, that sort of thing. Things that they can't do that we do not want CERTs doing, suppressing large fires. Again, they're not firefighters. We don't want them to be entering heavily damaged buildings that have potential for collapse. That's not the correct place for them to be. Performing hazardous materials cleanup or anything like that. Performing medical fire or search and rescue operations beyond their level of training, or activate or deploy unless called upon for their procedures. So the basic level of training for CERTs does include some like light fire suppression. It goes over CPR. It goes over first aid. CERT members don't come out certified in those things, but it does give them a basis for that. And then as a team, if they decide it does make sense for them to have more training, to have the first aid certification, to have the CPR certification, they can absolutely do that. But just coming out with like the basic training, they're not quite to that level, but it is always good to sort of know some of the basics just in case. Some things that we include with some equipment for CERT, helmet, goggles, N95s, gloves, sturdy shoe, work boots. Those are the sort of things you can expect a CERT to need just as at a basic level. We are really fortunate that we were able to get some of these materials. We have CERT backpacks that have that and more, flashlights and bigger gloves, and it's jam-packed with all kinds of goodies like that. We have hats, we have field guides, so we're very fortunate that we have that. And so when a team does become registered with us, they have access to all that, and we're more than happy to support in that way. A lot of times when we talk about CERT, groups of volunteers, there's that question of liability. Fair enough. So CERT members are generally protected by the Good Samaritan laws. The idea around a Good Samaritan law is that a volunteer can't be sued for trying to help if something doesn't go correctly. The caveat to that is they have to sort of be trained in that. They can't start doing things that they're not trained in, but if they are trained and they perform it correctly and it doesn't go, as hoped, they can't be sued. And then the Title 37B, which we talk about a lot, is essentially workman's comp for volunteers. So if a volunteer is out there, they've been deployed by their agency and they get hurt, that protects them and covers the medical costs of their recovery. There are some things CERTs can do that are non-emergency. So again, that non-emergency time when we're not responding to anything, things like traffic control, distribution of smoke alarms, promotion of and awareness of potential hazards and preparedness measures, supplement staffing at special events such as parades. So, wouldn't it be nice if maybe for the parades or events, maybe you didn't have to have like your entire police force blocking off the street. You could have some volunteers who are trained in that so that the police force can be out, doing actual police work. Just kind of those things that make it a little bit nicer and easier for the communities, and they have more resources. So training provides the needed skills to help others and keep their skills current. So CERT program provides training, practice, and connection to others. We often would like to use CERTs in drills and exercises. So we as emergency managers need to exercise our plans as well. And sometimes CERTs can be really helpful, not only as part of the plan, which definitely is the case, but also to help exercise. So say we are pretending we have a mass casualty event, they can act as survivors. They can come in and tell us, they're having issues or something. And that way we can sort of practice, what does that procedure look like? And then they can also, talk to friends and family about volunteering, but also helping them get prepared. For us, anybody who takes the CERT course is great because it's one more person who knows how to be prepared, and they become less of an issue if there is an emergency, and then they are more likely to be able to help those around them as well. So it just lessens the effects of something like an emergency. So how are certs formed? So, there's the general community interest. If somebody just wants to start a cert, they can recruit around them and just find people around that are interested. You could also look into existing groups. If you have a Rotary, an Elks Club, Masons, Kiwanis Club, groups that already exist can definitely become a cert, just an added bonus to what they do. The municipality can get together and decide that they want to create one and do that outreach as well. They can decide to form that cert. And then that sponsor agency recruits volunteers. I'll talk about sponsoring agencies right now. So in order to become a registered cert, you do have to have a sponsoring agency. So that's a local, county, or state governmental agency. So any of those levels can be that sponsoring agency, and they are the ones who would activate a cert. So if something were to happen and they needed a cert to do something, that sponsoring agency is the one who says, yes, let's go do that. And that's how they're deployed and activated so that they can do something. We are not having cert decide that they need to start. That's the sponsoring agency can be the one who decides that cert's necessary in that situation. The training requirements for cert is a 20-hour in-person or virtual course. I will always advocate for the in-person. I think there's a lot of hands-on things that make it a lot better, and it does make it more sort of team building. So if you have a cert team that's trained together, they sort of know each other, they can work better together. But that's not always feasible for everybody, so that does exist online, and the state of Maine has approved it as something that we're okay with if someone takes the cert basic training online. And then some additional training that you can take that's not required, doing some damage assessments, road and event traffic control, wellness checks, the sheltering, EOC being emergency operating center support, and incident rehab. So those are in addition to things that not only do we think are great for CERT, but we are looking into providing as well in the future. Yeah.
About how long are those additional training courses? I'm sorry. About how long are those additional training courses?
It depends on each one. Road and event traffic control, I think, is a couple hours.
Yeah, a couple hours, probably an hour and a half to 2 hours.
Yeah. Sheltering is 2 hours. So they're not, each of them is not huge, though. I'm sure we could find some that are very long if we wanted to. Yeah.
So you would have to be cert, go through that course first before you could do any of the other ones,
Right.
correct?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Any other questions? Great questions. Thank you. Okay. So CERT was updated in 2020. So they did rearrange some of the units. They updated some terminology, and then they did add some things, including first aid, mental health first aid. There you go, I got there. And they dropped the start in RPM with more focus on treating life-threatening conditions in that area. So you might hear some people in the past say, oh, I took the CERT training a while back. It's a little different. And as a sponsoring agency, or the team can decide, is it too long ago that they took it? Maybe they need to take it again. It's not so vastly different. Like, we weren't telling them to run into burning buildings before, so they shouldn't do that now. But we can use a sponsoring agency can decide if that makes sense.
Start and
RPM.
yeah, I'm sorry. Could you define those again? Start and RPM.
RPM. I have to admit, I forgot.
So what's required of CERT once it's formed? So we do have annual reporting to MEMA. It says and FEMA, but it's MEMA reporting it to FEMA, which includes the rosters, so just a list of who's on the team, the training completed, and the number of activations basically throughout the year. Most of that is fairly simple. The activations isn't like a big report. It's just kind of like, what did you do for what? The trainings, again, just kind of an idea of what you're trained on. And that's actually more for me because I am very interested in what certs know how to do, so that if another community needs that support, we can ask that cert if they can support that community in that. And then the annual reports do help us satisfy Title 37B liability documentation. We have to essentially pay for this Title 37B workman's comp, so the more information we have about who's a registered volunteer, it really helps us solidify that list and like who we can cover. How can social services and humanitarian organizations support or work with CERT? General information sharing is always helpful. Networking, training and programs and services. I think a lot of our social services have a lot of good trainings and good knowledge, so they're great partners for coming in to get CERTs trained up in that and in their areas of expertise. And then those referrals. One of the things that we've talked about that we would love to see more CERTs being able to do is that wellness check. So something happens, we know of a few people in the community who nobody's heard from, or we know that they're not very mobile, so we send out a group to check on them, and then we see that they do have needs. And if they know, the social services in the communities that could fill those needs, then they can give those referrals. So, the better connected CERTs are with social services and what they're able to provide, I think the better for the community as a whole. So who can request a CERT to be activated? The local or county EMA. So say here in Fairfield, you have the city of Fairfield has a CERT team, but then Augusta needs the support for it. They're trained in something specific that Augusta needs. Augusta EMA could ask for that support, and it would be up to that sponsoring agency, the city of Fairfield, to say, please, can we use your CERT to do this? And they say yes or no. Or Kennebec EMA could ask for it as well. And then if something happens in Fairfield City could say, hey, CERT, let's go. That's a very easy one. So again, what CERT members cannot do, they can't respond on behalf of an affiliated social service organization. So, it's common for people who are engaged to be engaged with maybe multiple, so they can't go out there and be, also part of the United Way and serving as CERT, and there's different lines. United Way does this, CERT does this. They do, if they're out there as a CERT, they do what CERT does. They don't do what United Way does. Or the humanitarian organization when activated, so no duplication. We don't need that. So what's required to start a CERT? Again, everybody takes that training. The program must have a sponsoring agency, so that local, county, or state government organization. There's a registration form. It lives on our website. And then the state CERT coordinator approval, that's me. So essentially, when you get all your stuff in, I'll say, great work, you're registered. And then just those ongoing requirements of submitting reports yearly. And it's pretty simple. And if you're missing something, I certainly won't say, and now you can never be a CERT. We'll work together, we'll figure it out. Because we want CERTs to happen, so we'll try to do support. So what's some things that we see in the future? We just completed a CERT Train the Trainer, so we have a lot more trainers. Sarah's one of them, in the state. So, we're hoping to continue to get more and more trainers. The specialty training, that list of things that mentioned before. The future plans for something like a CERT rodeo, where CERT teams come together and they get more trained together, they do an exercise together, and it's kind of like a full day of CERT exercising and learning. And then a state CERT working group, so a group of folks who kind of act as an advisory council to us to help us, create better systems for CERT and sort of have that pulse on what CERTs need in the community. So that's something else we're working on.
So when you're talking about the train the trainer piece there and specialties, I'm looking under the additions that you had listed out earlier. So wellness checks,
Yeah.
somewhere along the lines of kind of psychological first aid or background for that piece. Is there elements of that in that training to be a little more
In the Train the Trainer?
adept to, in those sub trainings?
Sure. So,
To specialize in something like that? Because that might be something
oh,
my
you mean like
organization
could a
is
CERT specialize in something like wellness checks?
Yes.
Yes, absolutely.
Okay.
Yeah. So CERT could definitely be like multifunctional, sort of like a general support, but they could also totally focus in on something. If it made sense for them to be highly trained in first aid and they ran the first aid tents for all the events, that's great. But if wellness checks make sense, then yeah, I think they could be highly trained in that, and they could probably get even more training in even just the psychology, the person to person, maybe even like social work, that sort of thing. I mean, not to make them social workers, but you know, kind of the idea that they just have more training on how to help people, you know, who maybe are homebound or just need extra supports. Yeah, that's very common for certs to sort of have a specialty in what they do usually. Any other questions? What a great engaged group. Thank you so much. So we do have some resources available, as I mentioned, CERT field guide. So it's kind of like all the training, the basic training in one little field guide. So if you can say, I don't really remember how to do this, you can find it and training will all come back. We do have some training props and resources like a Rescue Randy. So like a very heavy mannequin doll that you get to carry around and pretend like it's someone who can't move. We have the CERT newsletter, also something you can sign up for on the MEMA website. It's a quarterly newsletter. I try to do highlights of what certs are up to and then upcoming trainings that people can get involved in, and then just general program support. Between Bill and myself, we try to give as much support as we possibly can. We love the idea of CERT, so we will support it. Any questions? Yes.
Like 4 questions for you. I don't know if this is working or not. The first one is, what is the cost?
No cost.
Okay. How long is the cert actually valid for? You have to requalify?
As long as they continue to do the yearly reporting, they're valid forever. As long as they continue to do those reports, you know, and so it does require that roster. So, you know, if everyone on that roster stays active, then, you know, that's fine. And then there's the activations and training. So as long as those are getting turned in and everyone's sort of staying exercised and up to date, then that's valid, unless they do like huge changes to the course, which I don't foresee.
Is there a minimal size for a class?
5 to 10.
Yeah, I mean, it depends on, you know, there's no rule. For example, you
Right.
probably don't want more than 20, but it depends on how many instructors. So you're usually going a height. With this class, it's kind of unique. So you can have maybe a primary instructor, but you bring subject matter experts. Like if you're going to do a class on fire extinguisher, you bring some from the fire department. If you have somebody that's going to do a class on first aid, you're not doing EMT or even advanced nursing, but here's some things you can do and bring in a nurse, EMT, somebody medical provider. So there's a couple of angles you can go that. So you may have a couple primaries that actually help coordinate, and then you actually bring in your subject matter experts.
Yeah. But as far as like a CERT team size, there are some positions, like there's a team leader, there's someone in charge of logistics, there's someone in charge of, so you do need, I think, at least 4 or 5 people to like kind of complete the structure. But as far as like a class, yeah, as Bill mentioned, like in a class, you probably wouldn't want to get more than 20, but you could theoretically do multiple classes and combine a great big CERT team, but it might make more sense to like divide them out and have different specialties.
Where are the location of the classes?
You tell us. So if you want a class, if this is something that's you're interested in, you can coordinate with us or Sarah, Stephanie, and you know, we just find the correct space and time, and maybe you have an answer.
We have reserved 3 Saturdays in January for CERT training. So we just need people to be sponsored and people to come. So it's, you know, it's up to our citizens to come up and volunteer for this.
I have a question.
Yeah.
One more.
Ladies,
And lastly, does CERT have to be activated in order to respond?
Yes.
So we're talking about, okay.
Yeah, as a CERT, yes. The sponsoring agency needs to say this is what needs to happen. We don't want people self-deploying for probably obvious reasons, but yeah.
And one thing, kind of tag on to that, is important to think about is one of the benefits of the CERT training is one of the primary priorities, I guess that's the best way to say it, is to keep yourself safe and your family safe. So part of it is that preparedness. So the first thing you do before you even leave is make sure your family's safe, your pets are safe. Because again, if you're helping somebody else, your family's not getting help. It takes other people away that could be serving others. The other thing with CERT that's really important, it's a team. Like the question about helping, if you haven't been called, you don't go. That's pretty much what we say. But the other thing is with CERT, you always work as a team. You just don't just go out. It's usually 3 people minimum, and that's really important for CERT integrity. But also, for example, something we're having, you probably go to a staging area, and then they'll deploy you to wherever you're needed. But very good question.
Any more?
I have a really loud voice. I don't think I need that.
Well, it's for the television, so they can hear
No,
us
I
on TV.
When you do the testing and you're going through the classes and everything, in the end, do you give tests, like written tests, where people have to?
Kind of, but I mean,
So you kind of can't really have learning disabilities or anything like that?
We in Maine believe in an open book test.
yeah.
I will tell you, some states don't. What we feel is important is the idea to get the content, to reinforce the material. That's why we feel it's really strong. So the only, I would say, no open book test, maybe your first test that you would take, where you're just trying to get the instructor get an assessment. What
It's a
people
pre-test to see where everyone's at.
Yeah, but at the end you have a certification. It's open book.
Yeah.
And again, that little book we were talking about,
Field guide?
we didn't bring one with us, but the CERN handbook. Oh my gosh, we had so much feedback. We handed them out for the first time. Everybody was going crazy over it because it was like, oh, now I remember that.
Yeah.
So
Open book, you mean we can do the test with the book?
yeah. And
Yeah.
it's not a complicated test.
Yeah, because a lot of people don't have memories. Or
No, that's totally fair.
disabilities, and so,
I guess I just want to add something to your specific question about taking tests. I'm a very experimental learner. And I can tell you that I took the Train the Trainer course. It's 2 days long. It's a lot of information at once, but they are literally trying everything they can to get everybody to pass. And I will adopt that same mantra, and I'm sure that the town will. There's a job for everybody in CERT, and so we want to be successful and have everybody feel welcomed and like they can make a difference.
Yeah.
Is there an age limit as to who can sign up?
Phenomenal question. So, under 18 and younger, there is not part of CERT. However, there is a teen CERT program. They usually run out of schools. So if that's something that people are, interested in, there are resources for that. And so, so if they're, not of adult age, but then if they're 18 or older, if they're adult, anyone is welcome to join.
So you take somebody older?
Absolutely. Yeah.
We actually prefer.
Yeah. More experienced, more time, smarter.
We do.
More life lived.
One of the challenges, like we mentioned, Teen CERT, which there are some really good Teen CERT programs, but also college certs, they're not there for the long haul.
Yeah.
So your knowledge of your community, your neighbors, your friends, your family can make a big difference and actually add a lot to the ability for CERT to serve your community.
Yeah. And besides the being too young, there's no being too old.
Hi. When you first started your presentation, I was wondering what the difference was between CERT and the Red Cross, because we do many of the same things. But what I came to realize is that it's a concentration of volunteers. Red Cross, our office is in Bangor, and so we cover everything from Somerset County all the way up to Aroostook in that one chapter. I'm in Mercer, and I'm like the queen of Somerset County. If there's an emergency in Somerset County, you'll see this hair there. So I really, really appreciate the fact that you guys might have a local group that we can work with, that you can work with, and get things done better and quicker.
Yeah.
And I would like to say that this is working with our emergency management people, like without, in the town of Fairfield, it would be the fire chief. So we
Oh, yeah.
work under them.
Yeah. Any other questions? Great questions, everyone. Okay. I forgot my cards, but Bill didn't. So if you do think of more questions, grab Bill's card over there on the table. We sit right next to each other. He'll find me, and he knows everything too. So if you have any more thoughts, you reflect on it, and something comes up, please reach out. We're always happy to answer those questions.
Thank you, Kelsey.
Thank you.
All right, now for Bill.
All right. Bear with us a few minutes while we transition over. Well, I really am excited when Stephanie invited us up here. I was telling Kelsey, and because we were here, a few months ago and had a great time here, and it's great to see some faces I've seen before. And there is no September 39th. I don't know how that came up. I just realized that. We'll go on. We didn't.
Bill, can I get you tucked closer to the point?
Yeah. I can't believe I did that. I tailored it just for everything here. When you do this work a lot, you have to remember to stop, take a look, and I did, but I hit the wrong numbers. So, we had a great time when we were here before, but really what I want to throw out there is the idea that all disasters start local and end local. And like was mentioned before, you know your community, you know your neighbors, you know your community needs and demographics. And we know from emergency management that we can't do it alone. Our role isn't response, it's coordination. We partner with the county emergency management agencies, the local emergency management agencies, and we try to provide, like my focus in my job, I'm the mass care coordinator. I do mass care, which is the sheltering, emergency feeding, family reunification, and distribution of emergency supplies. So my role is really to help coordinate support at the statewide. I work with Amanda here from Franklin County. In fact, Sarah, Amanda, and I had a great time going out in their county about 2 years ago now, actually going out and looking at their shelters and looking at their plans and stuff like that. They're great partners to work with. As Kelsey, we work together, like we kind of help each other out. If I'm out, she follows up and does mine, and I do hers. We work together in disasters. We work really close, particularly on the recovery aspects. But the idea of sheltering and cooling and warming centers is really something I'm very passionate about, but I also know the importance that we have to be prepared. We don't shelter a lot in our state. That's a good thing, probably. We're very resilient. Now, I don't think many of you here were here for the 98 ice storm, were you? Yeah. It's funny, I get in some, they're like, what? What are you talking about? But because of that, we don't, I got to be careful I say this because we've had a lot of disasters in the last few years, storms, stuff like that. But the idea, we never can say never. It's not if, it's when. So what I do is really try to build capacity at the local level when it comes to mass care topics. Work real close on CERT. I work with helping support our volunteer organization, Active Disaster, and also teach ICS. And we kind of are unique in our position. We'll do whatever it takes to help our partners, whether it's the county EMAs, our state agencies, and even like yesterday I was with DEP. But the idea is we work together, and we want to really have a deep passion to make sure that the communities are resilient. That's part of what we do, and making sure when that disaster happens that we don't have to come out, but we can support. Hey, what kind of resources you need? I've worked, a lot of my work involves sheltering training. I actually do surveys of shelters. We have actual other trainings we do on incident management system for volunteers. We have a variety of resources, and we also work with a lot of we call partners agencies, whether it's Red Cross, Salvation Army, Good Shepherd Food Bank, and throughout the state. So I'm going to talk about some definitions in this class, because I'm going to kind of condense it in interest of time, but you will have time to ask questions. Feel free to stop me at any time. I'm very passionate, you'll see in this, but I really enjoy helping people be better prepared when something does happen. Like we were mentioning, there are some of the additional things you can do with CERT, like sheltering. We just recently did an exercise in Cumberland County, we had over 70 individuals involved with the shelter exercise. Pretty impressive. And just imagine, you have your CART teams, you have your CERT teams, you had Civil Air Patrol, which is pretty exciting to watch. I think you were there, right? Yeah. And it was pretty neat to see people come together. And it wasn't complicated. It was very easy to do. So we'll talk about definitions, realistic planning. We're going to talk a little bit about facility. Like I said, I'm going to condense. I actually do a complete course on how to survey facilities too. We'll talk about some of the staffing. What are the staffing needs? What's the capacity of a shelter? How do you determine it? And I can tell you there's no one size fits all. Each community is a little different. I'm actually going through all of the shelters in our state on a database, and it's amazing when I think about how many thousand people in our state, if all of our shelters were open, we're probably, I'm estimating right now, probably 20 to 40,000 people that we could shelter. Now, if that happens, I think I want to be on vacation because that would be not a good thing for our state. But we don't shelter a lot, but when we do, there are needs. I'm going to talk about community partners. I'm going to talk about some of the documentation and then the setup. I'm also going to kind of start it out kind of talking about what are some of the things that have been going on around the country. You know, it's been interesting. Since COVID, we've had to reinvent sheltering from a different perspective. It used to be we put people in gyms, churches, you name it, community centers, and there was never concern. And let's just put large groups of people in. Let's go ahead and do it. Well, COVID kind of threw things out. That kind of threw things out there. We've kind of learned some new things, some good best practices for safety. But we have some new things we do that we've never done before a lot. So for example, you know, the idea of sheltering right now, you're typically looking at that you can't rely on your other partner agencies all the time. Particularly in our state, it was mentioned there, you have a big area to cover in the northern part. I used to work with the Red Cross, and we were like, you know, as I tell people, in like the northern New England region, Red Coast folks say, well, you can just go up here in a couple hours. We say, no, how about 2 days, you know, when you look at the entire state. So the idea that we need to realize that first 24 to probably 96 hours now, depending because of resources, particularly in a large-scale event, we have to handle it locally to get things started. Then we can bring in other resources. That's kind of the good and bad about being in Maine, because we are a little more resilient in other places. And like I said, we don't open shelters. Sometimes sheltering is not the best option. The other thing we're learning across the country is that, you know, cooling and warming centers. Not too long ago, I think it was July, we had 110 cooling centers reported open in the state. Record number since we started tracking. Typically, we run in an average summer, and those are like a 2 to 3 day period. I average maybe 50 to 60 max. More often, I'm starting to see, even on warming centers, the numbers are lower. People are a little more, we haven't had a really cold winter either. But the heating and issues have been extreme heat. So that's been common, not only here, but across the country. Just recently, like 2 weeks ago up in Portland, Oregon, and it's usually their Indian summertime, they actually had to open up cooling centers because it was so hot. And, you know, when you're on a humidity, like the coastal humidity, and you know, it's ugly. It is very ugly. But we've seen more things happening. We've also seen wildfire behavior. Everybody remember what happened in LA this January? That's becoming more the norm. One of the challenges there is that, so for example, they had some unbelievable fire behavior. And what used to be, if somebody were to have a wildfire, we've got plenty of time to get ready to evacuate. They use out west, they called ready, set, go, a 1, 2, 3 approach. Get ready. We have a fire occurring. You got start getting ready just in case. Get set. Yeah, it may be getting a little closer. And then 3 is you go. Well, what they've found in many of these cases across, particularly the western part of the U.S., the time for fire to give you some time to evacuate oh, you don't have the time you thought. So it causes some challenges. We could have that same thing happen in Maine. We have a drought. So the idea that sheltering is not necessarily your first option. It may be the evacuation center, and then you determine where people will shelter. Sometimes they're in the same facility. It really depends on the weather condition. We've also seen in many places, and it's been watching since COVID hit, where our numbers have gone into shelters has decreased dramatically. Bless you. Right now, I believe there's 5 shelters open in the country. As of this morning, I believe there was 9 people in those 5 shelters. Pretty common. You have shelters open where people don't go. As of this afternoon, we had one shelter open, but I don't believe anybody was there. But those are common trends where, like in the LA fires, they estimated about 200,000 people evacuated, and the numbers goes between 1,500 to 2,000 people sheltered, and many of them were homeless. So a lot of times people will go to their friends, family, instead of going to a shelter. And then also others, instead of going to a shelter, you'll see shelters open where trailers and RVs are outside. They'll still get the same resources, food and other resources, but they'll actually stay in their shelter. And we saw this a lot in Oregon and Washington with some of the wildfires a few years ago. Also, again, fewer people going to congregate shelters. Society has changed. How many remember in your neighborhoods, particularly growing up, where you had a porch out front of your house, you knew all your neighbors, and you also talk to people on your porch. On Saturday mornings, particular evenings, you're sitting there talking to people. What happens now? Oh, porches are in the back. We don't know who our neighbors are. We're inside more because we're on internet, TV. I'm one of them, I admit. I do go for my walks. But the idea that, we don't socialize as much. And then people are more, even like the RVs and motorhomes. Maine has 6,000 RV campers and trailers registered. That's not counting those on the sales lot. When you start thinking about that, you're like, oh my gosh, there are a lot of resources that we never thought about. So, and then the other thing is thinking about considering when you open a shelter, do you have a place for nursing mothers? Pets. How many have pets that are a part of their family? Yeah. So the idea that used to be, even like Red Cross, used to not allow pets in. Now, and I'll talk about pet laws a little bit. I'm not an attorney, but some of the best practices. But now more and more shelters are being opened to either co-locate pets in a shelter, putting them in crates, or in a nearby facility because they're part of the family. And just think about this. If you're in the shelter, you've already been traumatized because you displaced. What are you thinking about if your pets are at home? So it's really important to think about. We do that when we go into a facility to do a survey. We ask, are pets, I can't even say it, pets permitted? Sometimes yes, sometimes no. Now, just the bottom line is, if it's a service animal, you can't turn them away. But we found more and more facilities being open to pets. We had one we went to, no, we just don't have capacity. But you know what? We have our Humane Society or pet shelter can handle that for us. So, and then, something new is Airbnbs. Who'd ever thought? There's actually some cases like in Kentucky and other states where they've had so many disasters, they don't have a place to shelter people. They actually put them in Airbnbs, and some of it's donated by the Airbnb Association. So you can kind of look outside the box. What I like to do when I'm doing this class is talk about definitions, because we hear all kinds of definitions. Like, for example, some of you may have seen some news articles about the warming shelters that were just given some funds. Some communities were given funds, quite a bit actually, which is pretty neat. But the idea, typically those warming shelters are targeting, they're not considered disaster shelters, they're targeting the homeless. They're very important. They also are overnight, meaning they have some sleeping accommodation, but they're also subject to local codes and ordinances. Now, Maine has a new law now where homeless shelters can't be turned away. But you as a community can determine where they can be located. A few years ago, we actually had a facility that was opened up overnight as a warming center. And the reason they did a warming center, one, is they knew that local zoning at that time did not permit that facility to be able to be a shelter. It was targeting homeless, which there was a need. So what they did is says, we're going to open up a warming center from midnight to 8. We'll provide all the wraparound services, but we won't have cots and we'll have blankets, but no, you can take a shower, you get food, get some behavioral health, any support you need, but you're just a safe place to go. But there wasn't any sleeping accommodations, and they met the intent of the local community. So when we're talking about terms, when we use cooling centers, warming centers, evacuation centers. A good rule of thumb, they're usually temporary. They're usually not overnight. They could be, but typically they aren't. And then evacuation centers are those places you go to when somebody needs to evacuate. It's usually temporary. It's not overnight. Typically, it could be, but they're temporary. And the idea with sometimes the evacuation centers, cooling warming centers could be the same place as a disaster emergency shelter. It really depends on what's going on. So we have two types of disaster emergency shelters: congregate, non-congregate. Congregate is where you bring large groups of people into one area, and then non-congregate is like hotels and motels. And to give you an idea, during COVID, we had 1,135 days where homeless individuals and those were dealing with some health issues were actually in motels and hotels in the state. One time we peaked at 1,700 a week. At the end, averaged about $1,250 a week. Peaked at 26 facilities. On the last day in May of 2023, we had 248 individuals in 5 facilities. So hotels and motels, college campus, and I'll talk a little bit more about that, are really a potential resource, and often are. Like with the Red Cross, they often will put people, instead of a shelter, put them in a hotel or motel if it's available. The challenge, though, in some parts of our state, there's times of the year where it's not available. The other thing is we'll use the term humanitarian, which is your homeless shelters and wellness shelters. Now, on a few occasions, your homeless shelters will open up for the general population when extreme weather occurs. We did have that a few years ago. We had 164 warming centers reported open in the state. We didn't have a lot of people go. It was too cold to go out. But we did have some homeless shelters says we have capacity for general population, which is pretty neat. So temporary evacuation centers are usually for your no-notice events. So for example, you had a hazardous material leak, a flood, something where you just need to get people out of harm's way. That's your temporary location. That's pretty common. And a lot of times, like I said earlier, with the fire behavior issues out west, they used to put them right to a shelter. Now they're putting them in an evacuation center. Okay, let's let things calm down a bit, get people out of harm's way is the priority. A lot of times these don't provide your regular, they don't have feeding, they may have bottled water and things like that, but they're really temporary. Now they could transition to emergency shelter. Many of our shelters in our state, there's about 260, 270. Many of those are assessed at what we call the evacuation capacity, which is a large number, and then the sheltering capacity. The difference with an evacuation, you don't have to have cots, blankets, you just get people out of harm's way quickly, and it works pretty well. So again, I'm not going to spend a lot of time. I talked about the homeless and wellness shelters, but they are important to our community. We do have a homeless situation in our state, and each community is a little different how they deal with it. But I think it's really important for people to understand that when we're talking about this, that it's the idea that your disaster emergency shelter is a little different. Although it's not uncommon to hear homeless individuals or unhoused go to a disaster emergency shelter for food, water, maybe a shower and things like that. Pretty common. The first thing we talk about, all disasters start local and end local. So when it comes down to making a decision on cooling warming centers, disaster emergency shelter, evacuation center, it's not done at the state level. Even the governor doesn't really have the authority to do it. We're a home rule state. So a few years ago, somebody said we need to open all of our schools for homeless individuals to have warming shelters at all of our schools. And what do you think the problem is with that?
The kids use it too.
Well, the kids use it, yeah, and it's like, well, really, that's not a state decision. Schools are home rule, you have school departments. So that didn't go anywhere, but although many of our schools are where shelters are occurred. Not always, but could be. So really the idea is that it's local decisions. So the local EMA director would be your fire chief here, which is pretty common, maybe a town manager or police chief. They would make that decision. They partner with your local partners, your community groups and things like that, maybe even staff. But even on a shelter, it's like we as the Maine Emergency Management don't tell people where they can shelter or have to shelter. The Red Cross has no authority. Really, it's that local discretion, and we really embrace that, and it works really well. So if I need to open a shelter, I've got a report, we need to open a shelter in Somerset or even Franklin County. We partner. How do we support them? They ask for help, we get the help, whether it's using Salvation Army, Red Cross. It's not just like somebody says, we're going to open a shelter. There's some big discussions. It's collaboration. So I'm going pretty fast on some of this. Any questions so far? I slow down here. Okay. Now, did you bring the test? No, sorry. Again, that decision where the facilities are located is local. Again, we actually have gone into communities where we've actually evaluated the shelters or cooling and warming centers, but it's a local discretion. So if somebody wants to have a school, you partner with the school department, and they can say, yeah, you can use it, you can't. But it's not like myself or as Mass Care or anybody else. It's local. Where do you want the shelters? There's some places where we can't go anymore. There are, as in one community I use is the Colisée in Lewiston. Everybody says, oh, that's a great place for a shelter. It was utilized many years ago. But I should say at this point, we're not sure how much longer, but what goes on 24 hours a day, 365 days a year at the Colisée? Anybody been up there recently? It's in Lewiston. So kind of looks like a dome building. It's an arena. What do they like to play in the winter? Hockey. It's a year-round hockey rink, so it makes it pretty tough. There are other alternate facilities we have available, but it's a collaborative effort, and a lot of times the locals will partner with the county emergency management agencies. We have resources like cots and blankets. We have them at the county level, the state level, municipalities, the Red Cross. We have all these resources we can help get in. But these are some of the locations where these facilities, whether it's a cooling center, warming center, a disaster emergency shelter, and actually it may be the same place. Oftentimes your municipal offices are probably the best for cooling and warming centers. They don't require a generator. Shelters are a little different. You can shelter without, but if you have fire protection systems that are required to be in place when you're open, you can't really use it for a shelter because of the safety, like sprinklers. We have one school I went to a couple months ago. It was beautiful. And then we started asking, okay, where do you get your water? Oh, it's on a well. Okay, what about your fire protection systems? Your sprinkler said, it's from the well water. Okay, how about your heating system? Well, we have a heating system. It's a boiler type system. Okay, could you use it without electricity? No. Okay, how about your well? Can you pump? No, we don't have a generator, so they're trying to get a generator. So those things are important. So in what we call in a nice weather where there's no power outage, it could be a great resource. So that's part of the things we look at. There's a variety of facilities. Recreation community centers are really popular. Schools, fraternal or civic organizations. We have one committee, their primary shelter is a American Legion post. Really good. They have a generator. It's great. Your campgrounds, we have one community, our county, they think their fairgrounds is probably where they're going to have to set up sheltering. I mean, that happens. Your warehouses, houses of worship, college and universities. The challenge with college and universities, with a few exceptions, like Bates College is one that's utilized. The challenge is that the idea that if schools are in session, it's pretty tough. So, and that's what we try to do when we open a shelter, try to keep the infrastructure going. So if a community's been impacted by a disaster, and let's think of COVID. What's one thing, anybody have kids or grandkids that were in school during COVID? What's one thing we as parents wanted to have happen with the schools? Stay open. And I had one of those. It was a senior, and I was like, okay, you got to go back. You got to go back. Well, we know the idea, what we find is in disasters, anytime you can get the infrastructure back to a new normal, you're more likely to see a speedier recovery. So schools are one of those. So we actually look at schools and we use them, how to keep schools open and not minimize the interruption to education, but still provide that service. Hotels, camps, there's just a variety of resources that can be used. So again, I went through this. We have a one-stop shop. If you ever go to our website or you'll see media reports, you'll see, hey, this is a list of shelters or cooling or warming centers that the Maine Emergency Management has listed on their website. We have a one-stop shop where an email goes. Typically, it's from the County Emergency Management, or if they want their locals to do it, they send us this email that tells us, hey, we have a cooling or warming center open, we have a shelter open, this is where it's located, this is what we have provided, pets are welcome, or food's available. We get this, it's monitored 7 days, 24 hours a day, 365 days a year, and the neat thing is we get that, put that in front, posted it really quick. We had a situation a few years ago where we went to a new platform and we had added 100 new facilities. Pretty impressive in 2 days period. So that was pretty impressive. But the neat thing is we know those are going to be utilized on a regular basis, so it's easy to do. Once we get notified, it goes on our website, media looks at it, 211 uses it. It's a really good way to communicate. And again, we want to make sure people know. We know where the facility is, the address, contact phone numbers, any special accommodations. Now we'll talk about congregate shelter. That's what we traditionally call our sheltering. If we've had a storm, it's overnight, 24 hours a day, typically. Does it mean it will always be open 24? No. Your goal is to opening shelter, always get ready to close it. That's your priority. Not that you want to kick people out, but you want to be able to be in a position to house people, keep them out of harm's way. It could be from a fire. Some reason in Maine we have power outages a lot. Now, what I will tell you, the longer the power outage, the more likely we'll have to shelter. It's not always given. Again, we work real close with CMP and our utilities companies. They know what facilities and what our target areas are or have priorities. They work well with us. But really it comes down to a shelter may not have all the services. They typically are having your dormitory, your sleeping, and feeding. Those are typically primary. And then there's an entrance where you come in to register. You always register and track people. But, again, there's some challenges. If you have 100 people to shelter in your community, you only have room for 50, could be a problem. We have, like I said, that 40,000 number, 20 to 40,000. That's at maximum capacity. Most shelters don't see that, but they could. Very easily could. The other thing is the idea if we have like COVID come back, we reduce our capacity. So we have what we call 40 square feet, which is traditional. That's usually a room for one individual, a cot, and then it gives them some freedom, if you will. But if we have COVID or somebody has some health issues, we typically give them a little more space, usually 100 to 110 square feet. There are some places where they may require, if there's COVID, they'll require them to wear masks, but really you want to have a safe place for people to go. And remember that they've been traumatized. What do you mean I got to displace? And think about it. You've been told to evacuate or, oh my gosh, I don't know what's going on in my home. So you want to create that environment where they feel comfortable and feel like they have some privacy, if you will. And then I talked about terminology, non-congregate shelters. Those are hotels, motels, and I mentioned college and university. The challenge of college and university is there's times of the year where it's pretty tough to get into those now with year-round colleges. Their dorms are filled. Occasionally, their gyms may be open, but athletics is important. We also, what's unique to Maine, we have 13 boarding schools, so that in some times of the year could be viable. And then sometimes some schools, they're just not going to be available during the summer, because anybody ever worked in a school? What happens in the summer? What are the custodial staff? Yeah, summer school, but the custodian staff, that's their, yeah, I waxed many floors in the summers, and that was fun. But it was like, don't have to worry about students. We could do everything and get it done. But, again, non-congregate could be used. You have a large apartment fire. It may be, well, we really don't have the capacity to put in a shelter. Maybe we put them in motels or hotels. So that's something. And even FEMA does provide some reimbursement for non-congregate sheltering during declared disaster, presidential declared disaster. But again, it depends, particularly with families. If you have families, sometimes a shelter isn't the best place. Depends on, and even when we have sheltering, we actually look at, when we set it up, we'll encourage families to be here, single adults here, couples, depending on the demographics, what works best. So, one thing says, well, is sheltering a good option? Well, maybe not. It's not always the best option. Sometimes we tend to shelter in place and see what happens. Down in Florida, have you ever been on deployments to Florida, outside the state at all? Well, like in Florida, they have a hurricane coming. Like the night before Helene, 36,000 people were sheltered. They went from the coast inland, but they're ready for it. But they also they tell them, bring your own blankets, your own sleeping bags. They're used to it, but they have systems in place to do that. For us, we tend to be more, let's see what happens with the storm, because we know we get different things happening. The idea, and we look out usually more than 72 hours, even farther. When we know storms, like I'm monitoring hurricanes right now, good news is we're not going to have any, although we could use some rain. And sometimes it's too dangerous, so it's better to shelter in place. And the other thing, is it safer? Is it better for somebody to stay home than trying to go somewhere else? The other thing is, what we find, and even the idea of when people are sheltered, the idea that they want to go close to where their home is. It may be family or friend. If you have somebody that, unlike Florida, where they're just, okay, we know we're going to go to another county. We can even go into another state. They have agreements for that. But for our state, we typically seen that people will try to find somewhere else instead of going to that shelter. It's usually a last resort. But also, is that shelter close to my community? If it's not, it's probably not a good thing. It's probably not a good thing. We have some areas like in the coastal up north in the Bangor area. Oftentimes we had this happen recently, so we're going to send them to Bangor. And I said, well, that's not as easy. One, it's the city of Bangor is really, they will determine when or if they take people in for sheltering. They're really the final say. If I'm in another community, I can't just send, or another county, I just can't send them. Although we've been talking about sending a bunch to Franklin County, and they're ready to go. Yeah. No, but the idea is so related, but part of your planning is, but we also know people don't want to travel long distance. During the December storm, which we did have some shelters out, we scrambled, and part of our challenge is resources couldn't get there from here. From our office, we had some cots deployed. It took 5 hours from Augusta to Rumford. How long do you think it normally, you guys know that route pretty well, a couple hours max? Yeah, and that's why I say you never know. And again, they did end up sheltering some people to school, so you never know when it could happen. These are some of the situations that occur. Weather-related are probably where we're most vulnerable, and we've seen that over the years. First question is, when do you open shelters? And really, there's no easy answer. In some places, they open them all the time. In Vermont, anytime they know what, they're getting ready to open them up. We don't do that here. They also are different, so they operate quite differently. The other thing is that oftentimes we'll wait and see, do we really need to? What's the situation? Is it safer to just stay at home? Or What if you can't evacuate and have nowhere to go? We have areas of this state, and the December storm was a good example. You couldn't get there from here. I know that the roads between even Farmington and like Rumford, they weren't open. And we actually had resources in Freiburg couldn't come up because the roads were blocked. So you have those things to think about. We also say, well, we'll open it up, get it set up. It's easier to demobilize and ramp up. And I can tell you, you never want a rush getting a shelter open, because if you have people standing at the door, how many have ever gone to a hotel room and your room's not clean? What's it feel like? Oh, you get it. You're standing up. I want to get in. I want to get in. No, it's really kind of that same thing. So you want to make sure it's set up before they go there. And then you could say, well, it could be a training opportunity. Well, you don't want to use real world experiences for training, although they do become good lessons. So you need to think about your evacuation. The local emergency manager in collaboration with municipal officials will make that determination. What's the risk? What's the potential for damage? And then we get surprised, like the December storm. Oh, by the way, we've got 8 inches of rain in 12 hours. Oh, we're not used to this. So you have to think about those things in the community. And do they have the ability to, like for us, we don't come in. In fact, our partner aid, even Red Cross, we tell them, don't come unless we call you. We'll call you, develop those relationships, and that's what we do. Is we work a lot with our volunteer partners. Hey, we'll help coordinate. We'll tell you when they need you, and if they do need you, you'll know. So before I go any further, take a second. Any questions?
I just want to point out that cooling, warming centers, and sheltering is a great task for CERT. That's a great specialty for CERT. If that's something the community wants to do more of, CERTs can run that mostly.
Yeah, go ahead.
So you're saying that if we take this course in January, that Fairfield would be part of this CERT, we would be like a satellite or whatever you call it?
Well, it really would be your own CERT team. You determine your destiny, what resources you provide, what services you provide. So that foundation of CERT, the priority of CERT training, basic training, is to keep out of harm's way yourself. The idea is that you'll understand how to work within the system. But if you decide, let's say you decide we want to learn about wellness checks, we want to provide that service, or sheltering support, which I'm a big advocate of both, actually. The idea, well, maybe we can provide administrative support. So it really, and like at a local emergency management center, emergency operations center, excuse me. So you really determine your own destiny. You can build. Like we have a course we're going to offer. We've got kind of the outline. We're going to offer a class on traffic and event management to keep people out of harm's way, keep them safe, but provide a tremendous resource. We know there's fairs, all kinds of events that happen in the community you could be part of. It's a good marketing tool, but also helps for preparedness. We have some place, all they do is preparedness. They're at events, they're reaching out to their networks, they're doing civic presentations. There's just a lot of things you can do, and that's what's neat about CERT. You determine what you want to do. Like a lot of our CERTs are probably leaning more toward the ham radio operators training, but we're also seeing a big influx on basic CERT, and then, like we did in Cumberland County, where we actually did shelter training. It was great. They actually got a class and presentation, then they actually did hands-on. It was a lot of fun. Good question. Anybody else? All right, so I do talk about shelter. Everybody, so what about liability? Well, there are some things we always encourage think about is your Americans with Disabilities Act, which is important. And most of the facilities in our state that are built after 1992, 93 tend to be more public facing. Even your private facilities are ADA compliant. That's usually a good thing. But you want to think about your community. Is it accessible? Like, for example, if you have a a warming center in the winter, what's probably one thing you're going to want to do at that facility?
Make sure you have heat.
You have heat. What else? Shovel the snow and ice and make it safe. But you also want to think about those. Think it from those in your community. Is there mobility challenges? How can you accommodate them? The idea of service animals is really important. Understand that they can go in those facilities. But also identifying, you want to make sure that the place is a safe place. Safe is a safe place for everybody in your community. So that's some of the steps you'll take. And even when we go out and survey a shelter, that's the number one, ADA compliance, I think was usually it. And then, the idea if they don't have a kitchen, we don't worry about that because we can get those food resources through other partners. But the idea of thinking about those with accessibility and functional needs, there's been a lot of discussion about autism recently. And again, I won't get into the debate over what caused it, but the idea we're starting to see more and more people that are very sensitive, what I call sensory conflicts, if you will. So there's certain environments they feel very uncomfortable. So we have to look at that. Even simple things like lighting, noise, things like that. How do we adapt? Those that have health issues, we got to make sure we can accommodate those. We're not doing medical shelters, but we're doing the idea, how can we make them feel comfortable? And in some cases, those that are on medical devices, sometimes we find ways to get that generator to their home rather than bring them out of their home environment. That's why the wellness checks is a really good thing because we often, we find, I know in one of the things I talked to both Sarah and Amanda several years ago was the idea about their community. How do you reach your community? We have social media. What if people don't like to use social media? We talked about Franklin County, print media, and AM radio. Now, what's scary, what's going away? AM radio. What else is going away?
Newspaper.
Yeah, print media. So you have to kind of think about, make some challenges. We have some communities that are like, oh, wait a minute. We're going to get a generator for it's a church. They're pursuing a generator, be a beautiful location, can do a little everything there. They can do feeding because they have a serve-safe kitchen. They have all these resources. And then all of a sudden they're like, oh, but how do we let our neighbors in our community? They don't have power. They don't have internet. How do we communicate? I says, you're going to have to go door to door. So even CERT could do that. Go ahead.
One thing, so I did my first one back in May, San Diego for the tornadoes. And one of the things, it was a learning experiences you've all had, was around nebulizers and medications.
Yeah.
And those were two, because we were doing the assessment components, part of Catholic Charities USA, and it was amazing.
Yeah.
The need was really significant. First of all, I didn't realize that part of the country has one of the highest rates of respiratory distress. But I know we worked with the Red Cross out there around that. They set up certain hotlines for people to be able to get medications filled just like that, which was really remarkable. But that's another need I'd like us to be aware of. Yeah, and it's interesting when I'll actually talk about it. We have a registration form, same what Red Cross uses. We have versions of it that's the same question, but it's triage. One of the things they said, do you have any immediate needs? Medicines is one of those. It's a really good tool because you're triaging what are some immediate needs. Oh, do we need baby formula? Do you need medicine? And that's often glasses. That's a common. But things you need to live by, you find a ways to get it. The neat thing is with the resource out there, and even if you don't have the Red Cross, you can go to your local pharmacy and they can work with you as well. Hospitals are a great example. Our partners that could be used in some cases. They're open 24 hours. They have a generator, but there are some ways that you think about this. Now, the idea is you're providing a place for shelter, and you're providing some usually food, but also too, those are the other things you can do as things allow you to. Really important to think about because, I don't know about you, but if I was middle of the night and got evacuated from my apartment complex because of the fire and I got to go to shelter. We had a shelter situation in one community. We had 80 people displaced. We had unbelievable challenges because it's the middle of the night. 1:30 in the morning, we're trying to get things set up. We also have language barriers. I mean, some really big language barriers where often I'd use the kids to help us communicate. And then the idea, many people left
and they're not very law enforcement. They're not very nervous around law enforcement because they're countries that come in. It's, public government. Although and we actually had people go and chase them down to make sure they were okay. Really important. So you have things to think about: your Pets Sheltering Pets Act, which is pets evacuation transportation, and then your local codes and ordinance. So if you open a shelter, even a cooling warming center, it doesn't mean we're not going to worry about fire safety. No, that's still in place. That doesn't go away. Your food safety, we encourage don't take donated food that hasn't been prepared by ServSafe. Certified preparer. School tobacco use, substance abuse, and weapon-free zones, they're still in place. It's still in place. So if somebody wants to smoke or use tobacco, go off campus. And that's because it's really important. Now, I'm going to kind of go into, because of time, when we're thinking about planning assumptions for Maine, like I said, shelter may not be the best option. Depends on what you have available. Should include the development of a shelter plan, and also the first 72 hours. And when I say shelter plan, when I first came to my position, okay, what's the plans for shelters in some of our communities? What do you think they said?
We don't have one.
Well, they did eventually, but so, we'll use such and such. That's not a plan. I work with Sarah and we work with Amanda on some plans. Really neat. It's a lot of fun. But the idea, if you don't have a plan, it didn't happen, if that makes sense. So, the thing is, you need to think about those first 72 to 96 hours. If, we know in Maine, we're a big state, 35,000 square miles. Our partners like New Hampshire, Vermont, we've got all this area. I said, whoa. It's 9,000 square miles in New Hampshire, about 9,000 in Vermont, although populations are different. I said, you know what? You can't get there from here. What do you mean? We know up in the northern part of the state, it's not going to happen for 6 to 8 hours minimum, just the way it is. But the idea, you get that, and that's why we're promoting CERT, is you can start things going. Get it started. We'll give you the tools. We have a handbook. We have training. But again, it kind of goes back to that, the local decision. And you identify. We identify. Part of my work is to go out and look at facilities. I probably go to 2 to 4 a month. Depending on times of the year, we're actually go and assess the facility, the feasibility. Then we go back to older facilities about every 5 years. And in some places, we have some shelters were identified 30 years ago. In some counties, they aren't there anymore. So we delete them off the list. So, and we also know things change. Let's say if here you got a generator from this building, would it make it viable for a shelter? Very possible. You could still use it for a cooling and warming center as long as it's not power outage. So those are things to think about. And again, we know things change in a community. Maybe it once was the school. Maybe that's not best. We have a community up in Presque Isle where they have this big, huge, I don't know if you've been up to the fairgrounds, a big building that's their ice rink part of the year. They say, you know what? We're going to get a generator for the entire building. You only have part generator to keep the ice stuff going, make sure ice rink's always working. But basically, without power, that facility can't be open. But you know what? They have a capacity of about 500 people, which is a lot. But they know if they get a generator, it can be viable. So it really depends. And again, we try to keep it open, the facilities open. So here's some of the things, we look at about 3 people per family. 3.5% of families will bring a pet. We also understand that probably 10% of people in the community have functional needs. Each county may be a little different. And then less than 10% have medical care. But what I'm finding is when we talk about medical shelter, we're not talking like have EMTs, and that's what's neat about CERT. You get a basic first aid awareness that you can keep people from doing more harm. And then we can get medical resources, whether it's medicines or people that are medical providers oftentimes. We're starting to see that happen. Many remember with COVID, we had a lot of medical providers that were retired. they got engaged, and now like in York County, they're part of their sheltering program. So it's kind of neat you can do those things. And again, you always remember that you may have a pre-disaster homeless. What we found in some communities, they've actually worked in Hancock County, they partner with the local homeless shelters that they don't have, and even the record doesn't have capacity to deal with homeless individuals. Not saying they can't, but there are some special skills and resources, and they actually partner with the homeless shelters. So if they have homeless individuals, they'll actually work with the homeless shelter to house them. So, I know we're running out of time. So what I'm going to do is just kind of let you know that, the idea that sheltering be a great resource for your community doesn't take a lot. We always tell people always do in twos, and with CERT, it's three, even better. We have a lot of resources. I know Somerset County has a lot of sheltering supplies that are available. We also partner with Red Cross, our state resource, other county partners. So, if you do it, like I said, we're really hoping that we actually will do more shelter training for CERT teams, because that's really where our need is, that local resource immediate. While all your first responders are taking care of everything else, you can provide a tremendous service to your family and community. Yes?
When you talk about people going to hotels, does CERT pay for that?
No. What happens is typically if there's a presidentially declared disaster, there is what they call reimbursement. The local emergency management would make that if they want it, and then they can go submit for reimbursement. It has to be a pretty significant disaster. There are certain thresholds that be met, just because, and even for us, when we get like an emergency declared, president declares a state emergency, we've exhausted all resources. But what it comes down to is protective measures. How do we keep people safe? Typically, you try to keep your shelters open as short a period as you can, but sometimes, like they had a fire up in Milwaukee where they had it open for about a month and a half, but they also didn't have a lot of resources. They had nowhere else to go. So the idea, the CERT team would not be responsible for paying that.
We had a trailer park here in Fairfield that was literally underwater.
Oh, yes.
And we didn't know where these people were going. We took them in,
Yeah.
at our shelter for 2 or 3 days.
Yeah.
But where did they go from there, and
Yeah.
how did they pay for that?
Well, what often happens is the shelter doesn't cost that much typically, but the local emergency may have an ability to get reimbursed on those disasters. But anything beyond that, there's other resources, maybe Red Cross, it may be even FEMA has a resource. Because FEMA comes in, one of the things we do is when a disaster is we help identify disaster recovery centers that come in and provide those resources. So the big goal is immediate needs, trying to make sure that's part of it. And when you open a shelter, part of what you're doing is want to get a safe place, but then you look at what are the other resources could be brought in. It may be housing, it could be financial, it could be social services, it could be behavioral health, mental health, just a variety of resources that could be brought in. The other thing in Maine, which has been a challenge in some of our communities, if you live within 50 miles of some hotels and motels, they will not let you stay there. It's a policy. It's causing some challenges statewide. I know there's some efforts to hopefully, in a legislative way, I don't know if they'll be able to overcome it because that's a corporate philosophy. And I understand why, because what happens, people get in, they don't want to go out. That's happened a lot. I know one of the things that happens, and I know in Vermont with the shelters there, they had trouble getting people to leave. And that's always a challenge. So you're always thinking about how do we go to the next and what are the resources? You may not know for 72 hours. Anybody else?
Thank you, Billy.
Well, thank you.
That's a lot to think about. And now for Sarah. And Amanda is handing out a flyer, and we'll let Sarah talk about the Somerset County initiative here.
So I just quickly want to maybe plug some self-resiliency that you guys could all take today while we wait for the CERT training. There are a lot of things that we can do every day that we may not think about. So as you can see here on this little handy flyer I made today, I'm very proud of it, so enjoy the visual graphics. At home, if you're planning to be a CERT team, are you prepared at your house? Do you have pets at home? Do you have somebody who can take care of your home life while you're out responding, opening shelters, or whatever your specialty may be? There are times where you truly may have to leave for 2 or 3 days at a time. Do you have clothes? Do you have your medication? Do you have your food? Having your bags ready to go is going to be very critical to your response, and that's just a good practice whether you're on a CERT team or not. So taking some self-responsibility and being prepared is going to be very big, whether you're on a CERT team or not. Is your home, how are you going to evacuate your home if something happens? Are you in a floodplain? If you need to get somewhere, does your home become isolated due to flooded roadways? If trees fall down and block your entry or exits out of your home, how are you going to get where you need to be? Things to think about as you start to, develop if you become a CERT team. And again, this is all just information you should be doing in general preparedness efforts anyway. And perfect segue, Bill. If you had to go to a shelter because we're out of power for days on end, or the roads became flooded, where is your local shelter? Where would you go? Having this information ahead of time for you and your family, not only in your specific household, but if you have kids, loved ones, making sure that they know this information as well. And most importantly, how are you getting your emergency information? So a lot of county EMAs spread very critical information through social media. We realize that is a huge gap in our capabilities. We need to find better ways to communicate with people. We've discussed this with a lot of our municipal partners, so putting up signs, a lot of towns have signs that can display messages, so knowing where to find your information when you need it the most is so critical, and having an idea of how you're going to get that. So I think, we can take some steps into individual preparedness, but there's also an idea that disasters start and end locally, and that is so true. And as we see shifting things federally, we're hearing it even more. Disasters start and end locally. So go to your town meetings, talk with your town select boards, your town managers, get in touch with your local emergency manager. Each town by statute has a local emergency manager. So for us, it goes the state, the county, and our local emergency manager. And the information flows through the 3 partnerships there. Your local emergency manager does a lot of work, but if they don't know what community concerns are, or how they can do better, or what they can incorporate into their plans, the more voices that are heard and the more community that's there, the better the plans are going to be for your towns. So go and make your voice heard at your town offices, and make your plans better. So that's really what I have for you tonight, just based on time. And the last thing I will pitch to you is, don't sit back and wait for somebody else to do it. Everybody has an ownership in this, whether it's for your own resiliency and preparedness, but as your community, you clearly all care about your community if you're here tonight. So these are just some steps that you can take now to sort of get the ball rolling.
Thank you, Sarah. Thank you. And I can't reiterate that enough, but it takes a community to do this, and we need volunteers to step up. And I just, a few months ago, people were saying, why aren't we opening up the community center to be a cooling shelter? Well, it's more than just opening it up. We need people to help man it, and we need people manning it that know what they're doing. So for Kelsey and Bill and Sarah, I thank you. I hope this is a small step that will lead to many more steps for us. And I thank you all for coming. All right, and again, thank you to all of you for taking your time.